time, another PhD student of mine who recently graduated, Survi, whom one of our common friend, a common friend of me and Professor Murthy, still cannot actually, pronounce the name right. So, so I mean, but Kakuli has done really well, as you can see, and she has worked hard in the last 4 years and one of my best PhD students. So she has worked on developing and applying novel machine learning theory and algorithms and used it to analyze astronomical data. So let's hear from her, okay, for the next 50 minutes or so, right? Kakuli, all yours.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you for the final Viva Voce examination of my dissertation. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So title of my dissertation is Machine Learning Approach to Understanding Astrophysical Data, the Final Frontier Novel Algorithmic Study. Actually, when I went to Belgium just to present my initial work at the beginning, I had a lot of questions on this title. So I think today I can justify this title, why we have named it like this, why it's so long. The first part here is, it says machine learning approach to understanding astrophysical data. So in the first part of our work, basically we are trying to understand different type of astronomical object, and we have analyzed those objects, and we try to analyze the various catalogs where the data of those objects are present, and we applied various machine learning algorithms on those data to extract few useful information out of it. So that's the first part, and the second part is novel algorithmic study. Here we have actually designed our own algorithms and various mathematical model which we have applied on this astrophysical data. So I have completed my coursework in the year of 2016 and 15. So we have taken 4 courses. These are research methodology, advances in system software and compiler design, linear algebra, and advances in knowledge data discovery. So all these subjects, they have some relevance to the work other than advances in system software and compiler design, because research methodology was a compulsory subject to be taken, and it also helped us to carry out this entire work in a proper way. And we had also, I had taken another 2 subjects like advances in knowledge data discovery and linear algebra. So these 2 subjects are very much important in our work, because we had applied various algorithms in our work, whose actually the theoretical concepts are present in these 2 subjects. And we are supposed to take 4 subjects. So the last one, which is called advances in system software and compiler design, we have just taken that subject so that we can fulfill the norms of the university. These are few publications that we have. There are 4 international journal publications that we have, and these are actually published in Elsevier as well as in Springer. We have few conference proceedings. These papers were published in IEEE conference, as well as in a conference which is name is ISE in Washington, DC. Then I have one book chapter. This book chapter is on machine learning approaches for supernova classification, and it is published in Handbook of Research on Applied Cybernetics and System Sciences. Then we have some like articles in news letters and magazines, which are actually published in astrobiology newsletter in different volumes. Now coming to the problem, like what we try to do in this particular dissertation is, because we have seen that in whatever field it is, there is a huge amount of data that we are collecting in every day. And the same is happening in the field of astronomy also. Suddenly the volume of data that has been collected by various telescopes has been actually, it's increased, which we can call as a big data. And there are a lot of digital sky surveys are going on. and due to which a lot of data is accumulated. And those data needs to be analyzed and it has to be interpreted because the nature of this data is very complex. So the first part of the problem here is like we need to understand the data so that we can apply some appropriate model on those data and we can get the required output out of it. And the work that we have done is an interdisciplinary work where we have to have knowledge of both the astrophysics as well as machine learning techniques. And this is a new domain which which is actually its name is astroinformatics, where a group of people from different background are working, where people can come from mathematical background, or it can be some people from computer science background, then people from then various astrobiologists, astrophysicists used to work in this particular domain. So everyone used to give their own input, and as a result we can get some what you can say, some output which is useful for the astronomers. So here the main focus is to deal with the complexity of data, because we have worked on various catalogs and we have seen that there are a lot of problems we faced like while analyzing those data. There were problems like missing value in the data set. Then we had unbalanced data set in that catalogs, and there were some wrong values which needs to be corrected on different astronomical objects. The different catalogs that I have been work on is PHLEC. It's a catalog which is its name is Planetary Habitability Laboratory, exoplanet catalog. So it is this catalog holds the information on various exoplanets. And it is maintained by the University of Puerto Rico. Then the next catalog that we have worked on is SSSS, which is also called SuperCosmos Sky Survey. So this catalog holds a lot of information about various stars and galaxies. Then we have also worked on APSO database, where we have information about various stars, galaxy, and we have different information about, info about the novas and supernovas. Then we also worked on OpenNova catalog, which provide the basic information of various nova data. Then we have also worked on a mixture of various data set. That is the combination of ESSENCE Supernova Legacy Survey nearby supernova dataset, and this dataset is basically used to classify supernova. Let's coming to the problem statement. I think I need to excuse me. I just need to admit them. Yeah. So coming to the problem statement. The various problem, as I have discussed here, is the first problem is on the data, because the nature of the data is very complex and we are working on different astronomical data. So the first thing is collection of those data from the various catalogs, and then we need to analyze those data. So when analyzing, we face a lot of problems. So those problems are like imbalance classes in the data set, or it may be missing value, or all other stuff needs to be handled. So the first thing that we have done is the artificial balancing of classes, and we had handled overfitting of the data in that in the entire catalog that we had. And then we also require some metric so that we can estimate various parameters, and with the help of these parameters we can properly identify the various astronomical objects. So the next part, the problem that we had to handle here is the identification or classification of the objects correctly based on the various parameters that we have estimated. So the main aim is to design and develop a machine learning system which can analyze the astronomical data and reduce the complexities in parameter estimations. So when because these parameters are basically required to identify or classify the objects correctly. So the first, the foremost and important the problem here is to estimate the parameters, so that with the help of these parameters we can classify the objects correctly. So because the most of the work we have done is on classification. So before we start with her work, I want to introduce you with few of the astronomical objects, because these are the terms I will be using in next few slides. So the first object I have worked on is supernova, which is an explosion of a star. Okay, and the supernova is basically important because it is used as a standard candle by the astronomer, so that the distance of any other like astronomical objects can be estimated with the help of its brightness. Because when this star explodes, its brightness will be very high, and the brightness of the supernova is used, and it also matches with the galaxy in which it occurs. So that is why whenever it explodes, we used to use like the astronomers or astrophysicists use the brightness of the supernova, so that they can basically like estimate the distance of various astronomical objects. Then we have worked on nova. Nova is also an explosion of star, but we cannot say it is just explosion like supernova. But here basically it's the eruption of the surface of a star, and it can also be used to measure the distances of like a few or certain astronomical objects in the universe. So nova is basically it appears in a binary star system, where we will be having a pair of stars who will be revolving around each other. In that pair, one will be always a white dwarf, and the other one will be it can be a red dwarf, or or can be another white dwarf who will be in that binary star system. So in this, what happened is the less massive star, the star who is having less mass, it used to basically pull out some the matter from the other star, and as a result, after some time, it used to explode from the surface of the white like dwarf star. This basically, again, the brightness of this particular object is measured, or it is used to measure the distance of other astronomical objects. Then we worked on exoplanets, which is also called extrasolar planet. So these are the planets who used to be outside our solar system, and they can actually orbit their own star. They can present in their own star system, where they will be orbiting around their own star in either in our galaxy, or it may be in the outside our galaxy. So these are a few papers we have I surveyed, or I have studied, but these are not the limited one, but these are the papers which the concept of these papers has been used to in our work. So the first paper we had studied is by Schulz-Marcus. In this, they have worked on a two-tiered approach to assess the habitability of exoplanet. So here they have given two indices. One is called ESI, which is Earth Similarity Index, and the second one is called PHI, Planetary Habitability Index. And this indices is basically used to assess the habitability of a planet. And in this, they have used various planetary parameters to compute ESI and PSI values of exoplanets. In the next paper, which is by Irwin, in that they have introduced a new parameter that we call as BCI, which is basically the Biological Complexity Index. And this is an extension, and this parameter is basically developed, or it is designed from ESI and PSI. So this is also based on certain like parameters of various exoplanets. And this parameter basically just tell us like how efficiently our life can sustain in a planet. Then we had also studied another paper that is by Raymond and Debre. So in this paper, they have actually trained the light curve data using some classifier, and they basically used a time series data for classification. So this is the a paper that we have seen, which is used by various astrophysicists to classify the data using machine learning. So they have used some open source machine learning algorithm, which is used on this time series data, and they have achieved a good result. But it says it is not well tested for large set of data. So they worked on a smaller set of data, and they have achieved good accuracy from this work. Then These are some papers which basically help us to it basically help us to. I'm so sorry. Just can you give me 1 minute? Sorry. Sorry for the disturbance. Yeah. In this literature survey, here we have discussed some paper, and this paper basically talks about various data set that we have used. The first paper is by Reyes and al. In that, this paper they have discovered there are 21 new type 1a supernova data, which was discovered using Hubble Space Telescope. And here they have actually taken the light curve data. And in this particular case, these light curves were generated from the images that has been received from the telescope. And from those images, they have actually extracted various parameters, which we have used in our work. Then there is another paper which basically discusses on type 2 supernova. And all this, in our supernova classification work, we have divided the supernova into type 1 and 2. And the type 2 supernova is basically is a different type of supernova, and we have again subcategory under that. So in this particular paper, the author has discussed what are the different type of type 2 supernova which are available and which are discovered so far in visible band light curve. So again, the data that has been collected is collected with the help of some telescope, and it is again converted to the various parameter of this of those input from the telescope has been converted in a numeric form. Then we have then another type. We have discussed another paper that is by Research Strobe, and this paper basically deals with some nova that has been identified in various time. So here the author has discussed 93 nova which are classified into 7 different classes. And this classification is done based on the shape of the curves, the light curve that has been generated. Also, it has been classified based on the time to decline by 3 magnitudes from the peak. Then we have also studied another paper. In this paper, they have actually, we have 3 set of paper in this. We have studied only first 2 paper. It is on Supercosmos Sky Survey 1 and 2. In Supercosmos Sky Survey 1, it provides the user guide to the survey program. So it just talk about what the survey is all about and just give the user guide. So user is guided to make use of the that catalog or the database. And in the second paper, they have described the methods for image detection, parameterization, classification, and photometry. And here the object in Supercosmos Sky Survey is to produce a digitized survey of the sky in 3 colors, that is blue, red, and infrared. So these are a few papers which actually help us to carry forward our work. But apart from that, there are many other papers that we had studied during this entire course. So first we will discuss the various data sources that has been used. So the first data set that we have used is for a type 1a supernova classification, because supernovas can be classified into different type, but we have concentrated mainly on type 1a supernova because it is used as a standard candle by the astrophysicists to compute the distance of other objects in the universe. So this data set is a combination of ASCENS supernova legacy survey and nearby supernova data, and it is basically reported by in the paper by Wood, Vasi and all. And also it is a combination of new gold data set which is given by Reyes and all. So basically the data has been collected from different sources, and we had used the data set which is the final combination of all this data. And all the data is basically it's a light curve data. And here we have total 292 supernova with 4 parameters, that is the redshift, distance modulus, uncertainty in distance modulus, which is basically the error in the distance modulus, and the quality. So quality is considered as a class which is either gold or silver. So our main objective here is to classify or just to find out type 1s supernova. So if the supernova is classified as gold, if its quality value is gold, that means it is a type 1s supernova. If it is silver, then it may or may not be type 1s supernova, which is likely but uncertain supernova. So that is why those supernovas are assigned or labeled as silver. Then here the data set rejects all the supernova with redshift value lesser than 0.023, and those are considered to be as a silver quality. So that's why here basically we are considering those supernova who has a higher redshift value, and those are those values are, or those supernovas are actually they are present in the final data set, and that we have used for our classification purpose. Then the next data set that we have used here is for NOVA classification. So here we use two different type of catalog. The first one is called Open NOVA catalog. So with the help of this catalog, we just extract some general information about the NOVA, because it doesn't contain like the detailed information about the NOVA. So in Open NOVA catalog, it contains various photometric and spectroscopic information about various NOVA data. So when we have worked on this catalog, that time we had around 193 NOVA data in it. Then first we extract the initial information from the Open NOVA catalog, and with the help of those information, we have yes, sir.
Just a minute. I think somebody is waiting okay. To get admitted.
Yes. Yes, Archana. Okay. Yeah, thank you, sir. Okay. Yeah. So then the information that has been collected from Open NOVA catalog is used to download the detailed information of each NOVA from EPSO database, that is called American Association of Variable Star Observers database. So this database contains the detailed information about each NOVA, and which is a time series data, where we have the information of the various NOVA, their magnitude, and the time. And time is given in Julian date, and many other like attributes that we will see next. Then this EPSO database has photometric magnitude, which is it is estimated by different type of scientists. Some are amateur, or maybe they are professional. So whenever the people who are from all around the world, they are working on different objects or on this particular database, and they used to update their work or their whatever findings they get, that is updated in EPSO database. So that those value we have actually extracted from this database, and for every NOVA we have one CSV file, and this file contains around 24 features, and all these features are combination of numerical as well as categorical values. And this NOVA light curve data, as per the Richard Stroop, he has divided it into 7 classes. So we have also considered the same concept here, and the 7 different classes that in which the NOVA are divided are called S, P, C, D, F, O, and J. And this classification is done based on the photometric observations like shape and time to decline. So based on that, the 7 classes has been made. So here S stands for smooth, P for plateau, D for dust dips, C for cusp-shaped secondary maxima, then O for quasi-sinusoidal oscillation, F for flat-topped, and J for jitters. So based on the shape of the these light curves, these different classes were made. But here in our work, we have considered only 2 classes, that is S and P, smooth and plateau. And also, there is no specific class in which we can classify NOVA, like how we can do for supernova. So different people or different scientists use different methods to classify them. So as I said, a NOVA, basically it's a binary star system, and a NOVA outburst, it leads to the ejection of the accreted matter alone. So basically, like when this binary stars, they used to like revolve around each other. So the white dwarf used to pull the matter from the other one, the companion star. So as a result, it used to actually accumulate lot of matter around it. Okay, and as a result, the temperature of that particular star will also increase. And in case of nova, the entire that particular star will not explode completely. So there will be some eruption happen from the surface of the star. So that is why the nova outburst can happen repeatedly. It's not like that it happens only once. So that is why, based on how many times that a nova like explode or a nova outburst, so based on that we can divide them into classical nova and recurrent nova. So if nova outbursts happen only one time, we call it as classical nova. It happens more than one time, then we call it as recurrent nova. So these are a few observations that I have like seen. And yeah, so next we will go to another data set that we have worked on, that is called PHL-EC data set. And this data set is basically used for exoplanet classification. This data set is maintained by University of Puerto Rico at Arecibo. In this data set was developed from Hipparcos catalog, which contains more than 1 lakh star information. And by examining the distance of distance data, like how far a star is from the planet, and various other like stellar variability, then spectral grouping of the objects, and other properties of the stars, which is mentioned in this catalog. And the data set, this combines measured and model parameters of various other sources. So PHL PHL-EC is a very structured data set, which is actually easy to understand also. So because we have multiple such parameters which are measured and modeled from various other sources okay, and here it provides a very good metric for visualization and statistical analysis. In PHL-EC dataset, we have a total 68 features. Actually, when we started our work at the very beginning, the number of planets that we have in it were very less. And gradually within that 4 years of time, we could see how like the rate of growth of the dataset, because a lot of new exoplanets were discovered as time grows. And at the end, probably in the year of 2017 or so, we have seen 3,000 plus exoplanet information in that dataset. So when I have written my thesis in the year of 2018 or 19, probably at that point of time, we had total 3875 confirmed exoplanets. In that, we have 13 categorical features and 55 continuous features. Among these 68 features, 6 parameters contains general information about the planets, like its name and year of discovery, the method of discovery. So and those parameters are not so important in case of classification. So we had not used all 68 parameters. So in different work, we had used different method to select the parameters so that we can get the proper outcome out of it. Then in this data, when we analyze the database, we have identified different class levels. The first class level that we have seen is based on planetary class. So here the planets are classified based on the thermal zone, which is mentioned as hot, warm, or cold. These are the 3 classes, okay, in which the planets can be categorized with respect to the thermal zone. And the exoplanets are also classified with respect to its mass. So based on that, we can just call them as asteroidan, Mercurian, subterrane, terrane, superterrane, Neptunian, and Jovian. So as you can go from left to right, the size will increase because its mass increases, and as a result, its size also will increase. Then the planets are also.
Kakuli, sorry to interrupt again. At this pace, you won't have time to talk about the methods you developed. So I suggest you move a little faster.
Okay, fine, sir. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so all right. Okay, so this is the another class that is called habitability class. So which is mainly important in our work because we have considered this class habitability class where planets are divided based on their temperature. So we can see here there are 5 classes, but we have mostly concentrated on these 2 classes, psychroplanet and mesoplanet, because the temperatures varies from -50 to +50, and this is the favorable temperature where life can sustain. It can be either a macrobial life or microbial life, so they can sustain in these 2 particular classes. Next data set that we have used here is EPSO data set, which is basically used for I have discussed about EPSO database, but here in this data set we have certain problem. So let us just discuss about the problems and how we have handled it. So in this data set we had basically 24 features where we have Julian date, magnitude, then companion star, because it is a NOVA data. So NOVA is a binary star system, so there will be 2 stars. So we have those companion star IDs, star1 and star2, and many other information. So we have selected only 6 parameters out of it because we have not done any feature analysis, but we had actually we have studied about the NOVA, and all the important elements are picked from the data set. And it has been seen that around almost 60 to 70% of the data set was missing. Like it's not like only one parameter was missing, more than one parameter was missing. So that's why we need to handle those missing data. And I have already said we have handled only 2 classes, that is S and P, smooth and plateau. And the reason for taking only these 2 classes is because they have maximum number of NOVA samples in it. Okay. Like when we downloaded the data of each NOVA from the EPSO database, as I said, for every NOVA we had one CSV file, and every CSV file contained more than 10,000 plus rows. I mean, that is the various like observation of that NOVA at various point of time. So for that, like we had the time is given in Julian date and their magnitude and all other information. So before we classify the NOVA, we need to work on the missing value. So we had we filled up the missing value with the help of LSTM technique. Because LSTM technique, it works better with time series data, or if the data has some dependency among themselves, then it's a very good method. So that's why we have picked up this technique to fill up the data. Then, so how do we apply LSTM? Let us just discuss. So before applying LSTM, we had to do some pre-processing on the various features. So here the parameters Julian date and magnitude, these are 2 numerical data, and those data is complete. We don't have any missing value for these 2, but for other 4 parameters, there were a lot of missing values. And we had another parameters like common code, validation flag, and all these are categorical values. Then we have companion star 1 and 2, which are alphanumerical, which are either alphanumerical or strings of alphabet. So we need to do some pre-processing before we can fit this data to LSTM. For COMSTAR1 and COMSTAR2, what we did, so all these alphanumeric values are replaced with some number. So with some unique number we have used, okay? And if it is a string of alphabet, then we have replaced them with null. And those who have no value, so if some places are empty, then those are marked as 0. And then all the numerical values are normalized within the range between 0 to 1. So we just applied a range normalization technique if it is if the data for numerical like values. And then yes, so here for some NOVA, the comment code field contains spaces in between. Like whenever there is a comment code, if there are multiple comment codes given by different observer, then there are spaces. So those spaces we have replaced with null values. Then we replace all the missing values with mean and mode values of the numerical and categorical data. Because if it is a numerical data, we just compute mean of that particular column and fill them. And if it is mode, then if it is categorical data, then we just use mode, and using mode we just fill the missing data. And then we have estimated, we have fed this pre-processed data to LSTM so that we can estimate the values, or we can impute the missing values. Now, this is how LSTM work. So it is an advanced or enhanced version of a recurrent neural network. It has the capacity of working on on data who has long-term dependency. So as we are working on time series data, so this is a good model for our work. So LSTM is basically divided into four parts. So the first, like every node of the LSTM that we call as a cell, and it has basically three gate, input gate, output gate, and a forget gate. So here actually the programmer can decide what to carry forward next and what to input, what to output. So we can take our decision by our own in LSTM, and that is possible with the help of this three gates. So we can see this is called input gate. This is called, this is the first one is called forget gate. The second one we call it as input gate, and the third one is called as output gate. So with the help of, and all these gates, they uses basically a sigmoid function, and the outcome of sigmoid function is between 0 to 1. So based on the output of sigmoid function, we can decide what we want to retain within this cell or what we want to forget. So and what if something new has to be added, so that decision we can take with the help of this input gate. And also we have different, we are using this another gate that is not gate, is function. It is called 10 hyperbolic function. So we will see how all of this particular cell works with the help of these four stages. So the whole work in LSTM is divided into 4 stages. So the first part is called forget gate. And you can see here in this, the input will come from the previous state or from the previous cell. The output of the previous cell is considered as an input to the current cell. Also, we will have some new input that has to be given, X. And that will be first fed to a forget gate. So here what we do, here we can take decision what all information we want to forget, we want to drop, okay, and that we are going to compute with the help of this sigmoid function. So we can see here we will have some weight, and there are 2 input value we are taking. ht minus 1 is the output from the previous cell, and xt is the input to the current cell, and some bias. Then in the next part, part of the LSTM is having the second gate that we call as input gate or selection gate layer, where here we can decide what all input we want to or what all value we want to update, and what are the new data we want to keep in this particular cell. So for that, the first thing what we do here is, here we just use the input gate. Here it will take the decision what needs to be kept, and that we are going to compute with the help of this function. Again, we fed it to a sigmoid layer. So you can see here we just apply the sigmoid function on some weight wi, and we have this again the same inputs, ht minus 1 that is from the previous cell, and xt in the current state that input has been given, and with some bias. And at the same time we can also generate some candidate element, and this is generated with the help of this 10 hyperbolic using this 10 hyperbolic function. So it is a vector. We can see here CT is a vector where it comprises of certain elements or some candidates which will be actually new to this particular state. So again the same input with some different weights and some bias value. So, and then the last gate that we have here is called output gate. But before that, we need to update the cell. So whatever outcome we have got from these two will be updated. So first we multiply the output of the forget gate, and that will be added with the second part that we are achieving here in this particular case. So we can see here from that we have computed the value called CT. So the current state is updated here. The cell state is updated. By multiplying ft, whatever we wanted to forget that we are going to forget here. So multiplying ft with the previous cell state, that is ct minus 1. Okay, and then the second part here is we are going to add it. So this addition symbol has come from here, and that we are adding with the second part. That is here we are combining both of them. So we will multiply it with this vector, the candidate vector ct. So now here, this will basically give us the updated cell state. Now finally, we need to take decision what we want to output. So that we are going to do with the help of output gate layer. So again, in this we have one this we have used a sigmoid function. So this sigmoid function will take decision what we want to output. Okay, so again, depending on the value of the sigmoid function between 0. If it is 0, that means we don't want to output that particular element. If it is 1, we want to output, or if it is in between, then it goes. We just need to take decision like how we take in neural network. So here again, I can see here first we are applying the sigmoid function on this input ht minus 1 and xt with some weights and with some bias. And then finally, we need to like produce the output. So that we are going to produce with the help of this. We just multiply it with 10 hyperbolic. We just apply this 10 hyperbolic function on CT. That is the updated cell state. And this will basically help us to keep our output within a range between -1 and +1. Because when we do addition, the range may go out of bound. So that has to be kept within the range of within certain range, okay, so that the correct output can be given to the next cell state. So we are going to apply this function over here on the updated cell state. So this is how LSTM work, and we have applied this on just to impute the data for NOVA. So the output that we have achieved is like this. This is just a small snapshot. So you can see here we have used 6 different parameters. So first one is Julian date, then magnitude, comment code. You can see here in some we have 2 comment code because the comment has been given by more than one observer. And then we have some ID for these 2 companion star and then validation flag. So every symbol has different meaning. And this is the loss plot that we have plotted only for one supernova. This is for one nova that is by name BYCIR. And we can see we have actually if we look at this plot, we can see the loss of is it's very good, like it is very efficient. This LSTM had given us a very good outcome. Then we had few challenges in PHL data set. So here we had again we had the problem of missing value, then imbalanced data classes. So that we had handled in different way over a period of time. So basically at the beginning when we started working on this data set, we worked with 4 features. And at that point of time, there were not much like missing value seen in our data set. So what we do at the very beginning, at that time we have started only with 600 plus exoplanets. Here, if there are some missing value present in any of this column or any of the features, so we just handle it with the help of by calculating their mean and mode. Okay, so with the help of mean and mode, we had filled a missing value. So that was at the very beginning. And to handle bias, we had applied certain technique because the data set is highly unbalanced. As I said, we are concentrated on 2 classes, that is mesoplanet and psychroplanet, because these are the 2 classes of exoplanet who can sustain a life. That is, and we saw that in our data set when we worked on this data set for the first time in the year 2015. So we had only 664 planets with known surface temperature, because surface temperature is very much important to check the habitability of a planet. And out of those 664, we had only 9 planets or 9 sample who comes under mesoplanet and 7 who comes under psychroplanet. And the remaining planets were in a non-habitable class. So there is a huge imbalance in classes. We can see here. So here what we did, we just constructed some smaller data set, okay, from all this data which is available. So what we did, we just created smaller data set by considering all the planets from mesoplanet as well as from psychroplanet, because the numbers are almost equal. So we had 9 and 7, what are equal. So we have considered 9 mesoplanet plus 7 psychroplanet, and from non-habitable class, we have considered 10 random planets every time. So like that, smaller data sets were built, okay. So mesoplanet and psychroplanet will be considered in every smaller data set, but for non-habitable classes, planet were randomly selected from it. And then we have performed classification. So basically we have performed classification on all those data set, and then we took average of them, and we have achieved a good result out of it. Then in the year 2016, so the number of data like exoplanet entries were increased. It was 3,415, and in that case, out of that, there's 415 planets. We had 24 planets who belong to mesoplanet and 13 psychroplanet. So in that case, again, we had the same problem of unbalanced data. So again, we had to handle this particular problem. So first, we try to implement our various machine learning algorithm on this unbalanced data, and you can see this is what we have achieved as an accuracy. So we have applied the 6 different machine learning algorithm, and we just wanted to see how this catalog is going to behave, and we got a very good accuracy. But as we know that the data set is highly imbalanced, so this is not actually, these models are actually they are overfitting, so we cannot actually rely on this particular result. Then later we just handle this problem like this. So all the 13 entries from the psychroplanet class were considered, and also we have considered 13 entries from mesoplanet and 13 entries from habitable class, and that was selected randomly. And and with the help of this this 39 entries selected from different classes, we have formed a smaller data sets, okay, which is a balanced data set. And basically here what we did, we actually run it for 500 iterations, and we had constructed 500 data sets. So every time 13 entry will come from the meso psychroplanet, and 13 each will come from meso and non-habitable classes. And from mesoplanet and from the non-habitable classes, we have collected the data randomly. Okay, and totally 500 such data sets were framed, and we have applied again the same the 6 machine learning algorithm on it. Okay, and finally we can see the output of all these algorithms. So you can see here this LDA and KNN, in this case they are not behaving well, because their accuracy is 77% and it is 68. But when we have applied the same algorithm on the same data without balancing, we got it as above 90%, so 93 and 97. So this is where we can just say that the data set is balanced properly with the help of this technique. And then also we had some missing value in this particular data set in PHLSE, because at the very beginning we have worked on only 4 parameters. Then later we have included the 5th parameter, which is eccentricity of planets. And eccentricity, it plays a very important role to decide the climate and atmosphere of a planet. So that's why we thought of using eccentricity value also. And then when we analyzed, we saw that 60% of eccentricity value were not actually present, it was missing. And in that catalog, if the eccentricity value was missing, then they mark it as 0. So then again, we had to fill these missing values. So for that, we have used KNN imputation technique. So how we did it, so we have used 1,696 rocky planets, out of which we saw that 1,537 planets eccentricities are marked as 0. That means a huge amount of data were missing. So we need to now impute, or just to predict those data. So we use KNN based imputation for that purpose. So now we had again analyzed the data set, and we have seen that eccentricity of a planet actually they are related to some other features like zone class of the planet, mass class, atmosphere class, composition class, and all. So we have used a PCA algorithm to select all the features which are which actually contributes towards the eccentricity, and then along with all those so all those features along with eccentricity were taken together, and then on that data we have applied KNN imputation technique. So here again, first we need to do the pre-processing on the data. So we have converted all the categorical attributes to numerical, And then we just converted all the data into numerical, and on that we have applied KNN imputation technique. So here the KNN in this particular technique, we have used basically the Euclidean distance to find out the distance of each sample from its neighbor, and we had to select k unique neighbors, or I mean k neighbors which are more closest to the current sample. So for that we have used weighted average technique, and then so finally what we did after applying this KNN algorithm on each of these parameter which we have considered, so we could generate almost a very good amount of eccentricity value for all the planets whose eccentricity value were present, also were not present. And because at the end we had analyzed, I will just directly go to the result and I'll show you. So how actually what we have achieved from this particular technique. So you can see here, these are a few planets, and this is the known eccentricity value for those planets, and these are the imputed value using KNN. And here we used basically k-fold cross-validation technique, because we just didn't use only directly the KNN over here. So we used k-fold cross-validation where the value of k is 20. And we can see here the imputed eccentricity value are more, these are actually most, they are closer to the eccentricity value which are reported in the PHL dataset. Because these are some planets whose eccentricity values are already there in the PHL dataset. And with that, we actually validated our result. And we can see the results are almost close to the measured one. This is the algorithm that we have used. So it says nothing but it's a KNN algorithm that we have used to predict the eccentricity value for the missing one. So, and as I said, we have used the k-fold cross-validation technique. And after applying this k-fold cross-validation technique, we can see that the error was around 0.15. And also here we used that mean square error method to compute the error rate. Then I'll come to the classification techniques that we have done. So the first work that we have done here is to classify the supernova data. So we have concentrated on type 1a supernova because, as I already said, type 1a supernova is used as a standard candle because its magnitudes are already known to the astronomers. So with the help of the known value, we can compute the distance of any other objects that is present in the universe. So basically, I'll quickly move to the work that we have done. And yeah, so the reason for selecting type 1a supernova is because it used to brighten and dim in a particular order. So it is very regular. So that's why that's why people used to prefer using type 1a supernova as a standard candle. It can also measure the various objects which are far away from our galaxy. Okay, and yeah. So basically the classification is done based on the shape of their light curve and nature of their spectra. And so let us just see actually based on the presence of, by analyzing their spectra, we can also classify them. So first thing is based on the presence of hydrogen in their light spectra. If hydrogen is present in their light spectra, then that supernova is type 2. Otherwise, it is considered to be as type 1. Also, we can classify them based on their explosion. So there are two types of explosion that can happen in case of supernova. So one is called thermonuclear explosion, which you can see here in the right-hand side. And second one is called core collapse. So in both the cases, the supernova used to explode, but if you see the direction of the arrows are different. So basically there are two different way the supernova used to collapse, or they used to actually explode. So in thermonuclear explosion, basically it is a binary star system where two stars will be there together, where one is the white dwarf, and the other star might be a red giant, or it can be a main sequence star like our sun, or it may be some other white dwarf. So here white dwarf, it pulls off the matter from its companion star, and if and this process will continue, and whenever it pulls off the matter, the size or the mass of the white dwarf will increase. And once the mass exceeds the Chandrasekhar limit, which is nothing but it's 1.4 times the solar masses, then the star will explode. That is what we call as thermonuclear explosion. In core collapse, is basically it happens due to some fusion reaction within the star. As we know, stars are they are composed with different material. So basically, whenever a star it runs out of its fuel, like first if it runs out of hydrogen fuel, it fuses to helium. Once it runs out of helium, then it converted to like carbon, and like that it goes off until when it reaches to the iron. So at that point, and at every steps when the fusion happen, there at that point of time, the core of the star will contract, and as a result, its temperature used to increase. Okay, so at certain point of time when it reaches, it is left out with only the iron core. In case of massive star, then it will explode. That we call as a core collapse supernova. So here we are going to discuss about only the first type, that is type 1a supernova, because type 1a supernova comes under thermonuclear explosion. This is just a flowchart we have actually drawn just to make it easy to see the classification of supernova. So you can we can pass a supernova light curve data over here, and then we can analyze whether the spectra has hydrogen. If no, then we'll come to the right hand side. If yes, then it is if it doesn't have hydrogen, then we will come over here, because it says that it is hydrogen deficient spectra. If no hydrogen, then it is type 1a. If there is a hydrogen in the spectra, it is type 2. And then again, we are going to check further. If it is silicon deficient, if silicon is present in the spectra, then it is considered to be as type 1a. If it doesn't have silicon, then it might be type 1c or b. Depend if in that case, if it has helium, then it is type 1b. If no helium, it is type 1c. Then for type 2 supernova, we just see the light curve, the shape of the curve. Here we see if that light curve, if it shows some plateau. If yes, we call it as type 2 P supernova, that is type 2 plateau. If no, it can be either type L, or it is linear, or it is type 2N. That is, if it is log linear, if this light curve is log linear, then it is type 2L, otherwise type 2N. So this is how we can just classify the supernova into different type. But our main motive here is to use only type 1a supernova. So we have already discussed about the data set. So we have used this data set, which has only 4 parameters. That is redshift, distance modulus, uncertainty in distance, and quality. So which is nothing but the class. So we have applied these various algorithms, these algorithms on 292 different supernova, because the number of samples are less. So we have used 10-fold cross validation just to get better accuracy from these algorithms. And this is the result that we have seen. And we can see here LDA, the accuracy of LDA and SBM is less, but for the other algorithms, it works better on this particular data. Okay, then yeah. Next, we'll move to a NOVA classification. So that actually the main motive of this work is just not to classify NOVA. We actually wanted to work on the data imputation, because the catalog has a lot of missing value. Okay, in PHLEC, we had worked with only a very smaller amount of missing value, but here the missing value was more. So our main goal in this particular work is to impute the data. So we have already discussed about LSTM technique, so using which we have imputed the data. And after imputation, for all 47 NOVA, because we have considered 47 NOVA, 30 from S class and 27 from P class. And all those, the different CSV file were combined together, and we got a bigger file. And after that, what we did, we just added a new column to that file. So 2 class column, one is called S class, another one is called P class. So S is assigned the value 1 and P is assigned the value 0. And after that, we had sorted the entire file in ascending order of the Julian date. Okay, so that is how we randomized the entire data, and then we applied random forest classifier on this data set. So the data in the final data set, we had around 1,80,800 plus rows. And when we applied random forest classifier, we divided the entire data set into 70-30% training and testing set. And the accuracy that we have achieved here is 99.83. And as we know, random forest algorithm, it's actually one of the best algorithm because it is based on ensemble learning technique. And here all the decision trees in the random forest is generated based on the information gain value. And the output of this particular work is like this. This is the classification chart we can see, and this is the ROC curve that we have got, and AOC value is 1 in this particular algorithm. Okay, so you can see a precision and recall and F1 score, it's all 1 for both the classes. Then, yeah, so this is the main, so here in this particular work, we just tried to explore the habitability of various planets in the universe. So for that, we have actually proposed some new method or some new models. Here, the entire work is done on PHS exoplanet catalog, and we have already talk about these 3 features. So because ESI, PHI, and BCI, these are the 3 index based on which one can assess the habitability of a planet. But in our work, we have mainly concentrated on ESI. Okay. So I think I will skip some of the point here, some theoretical part, so that I can explain my work in a better way. Because as I said, we are working only on ESI. So ESI stands for Earth Similarity Index, and it is considered as an index, or it's a number that is basically generated for every planet. And based on that number, we can decide, or we can say whether a planet is habitable or not. So it says it considers Earth as a reference for habitability, and it measures the physical similarity of any planetary body with Earth. So all other exoplanets, the planetary parameters will be used to compute their ESI, and we used to match the ESI with the Earth ESI. So Earth ESI is 1. So if anything is closer to 1, we can consider them as habitable, or maybe potentially habitable planet. Otherwise, we can consider that planet as non-habitable. And ESI is computed based on some planetary parameters. So X is the parameter, and X0 is the Earth reference, or Earth parameter. And W is a weight, and this weight is actually fixed when this formula is given by some people who had worked on this thing. So they had actually fixed the value of W for different planetary properties. So here in our case, actually to compute ESI, we basically need 4 parameters. That is the surface temperature of the planet, its density, escape velocity, and radius. And the ESI can also be divided into 2 parts while calculating. So we can calculate 2 types of ESI. First one is called interior ESI, and this is calculated from its radius and density. And the another one.
Sorry,
yes, sir?
I think we are way over time. So
oh, is that? Okay.
Skip
Shall I skip it? All right, fine. I'll go to then, yeah, to HDL.
Present the models very briefly and go to the final neural network part.
All right, sir. Yeah. So yes, the proposed model here is called CDHPF, the Cobb-Douglas Habitability Production, production function. So here we have used one model which is basically used in economics, which is called Cobb-Douglas production function, that we have used here to compute the Earth's some habitability score for every like planet. So CDHPF is a feasible solution which will maximize the objective function. It's an optimization function, and it gives an optimal solution under certain constraint. So there are 3 constraints, so based on which we can compute the output. And here we have considered the CRS and DRS condition. because both CRS and DRS, it always, when we are going to plot them, it will always be a concave graph. So and that is what we want, because we want to compute maxima for our model. So this is how we have formulated our model. So y is equal to, it's a production of some xi. So xi is basically, these are the various parameters that we have considered, and alpha I is is considered to be as a elasticity coefficient. So xi is, in our case, we have considered 4 parameters, as I discussed, like surface temperature, escape velocity, radius, and all. And then here the main goal is to maximize this coefficient, that is alpha, okay, based on this under this the returns of scale. So here the sum of this the alpha, that is this coefficient, elasticity of coefficient, it can be greater than 0, equal to 0, or it can be less than or equal to 0. So here, as I said, we have considered only CRS and DRS case. So in this case, in case of CRS, the sum of alpha will be equal to 1, and in case of DRS, sum of alpha should be less than or equal to 1. So here our main goal is to improve the elasticity coefficient of all the conform exoplanet, and we need to so that we can actually get a maximum score for each of the planet. Okay, so we have used the same the concept that I have discussed now in ESI computation. So first we have computed the interior CDHS value. CDHS stands for Cobb-Douglas habitability score. So we are computing habitability score for every planet. And for Earth, the habitability score is 1, because the parameter that we are using here are all converted to Earth unit. So that's why for Earth, the values are 1. And for Earth, the CDHS value is always 1. And first we computed interior CDHS based on the density and radius. So here our main motive is to estimate alpha and beta, which are the elasticity of coefficient of elasticity. And then next is the surface CDHS, which is we can call it as surface ESI. So it is computed based on the surface temperature and escape velocity. Again, we had to estimate gamma and delta. And whatever we achieved, that is Y1 and Y2, interior CDHs and surface CDHs were combined together using this convex combination method, and we got a final CDHs value for each planet. So here the W dash and W double dash, these are the weight that we have used, and we have estimated this too while executing our the problem. Now, these are some plot you can see. This is the interior surface CDHs for DRS case, and this is the interior and surface CDHs for CRS case. So we could achieve the maxima. We can see here this tip of this graph. So this is another way of computing the same value. So, but we have not considered all 4 parameters together, because when we considered it, we will not be able to actually plot them in 3D space. And to compute, just to estimate this parameter alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, we have used a MATLAB function called fmincon. So with the help of which we just computed them. And as I said, all the parameters were represented in Earth unit, but the surface temperature was not represented in Earth unit. So we had normalized that particular value and divided the surface temperature by the Earth surface temperature. And then that is used for CDHS computation. And finally, this computed CDHS value is given to attribute enhanced k nearest neighbor algorithm. This is an algorithm that has been proposed. It is actually KNN algorithm, but with some new enhanced property. And this algorithm should actually satisfy the 2 conditions. One is called probabilistic harding and thresholding. We will discuss what are these 2. And the entire data set is divided into 80 and 20% as for training and testing. And then we have divided the training data into 5 data sets. So what we did, all the CDSS code that we have in training data set is sorted in ascending order. Then we have equally divided into 5 classes. And then from those 5 classes, we have derived a new class that is called class 6, or we named it as Earth League, because the elements which fall in class 6 are potentially habitable. They are more closer or similar to Earth. And this class 6 is derived from all these 5 classes based on these 2 conditions. So let us just try to understand what are these 2. because this is a new thing that we have done in this particular work. So thresholding is basically we just see the difference between the calculated CDSs of every exoplanet with Earth's CDHs. And then we saw that difference. If the difference is within a specific boundary, that which we call as a threshold, we set that threshold value while computing. Okay. So if it falls within that threshold, then we consider that in class 6. That means it is satisfying this particular property. So that may go to class 6, provided it also satisfies the other condition that is called probability Harding. So here it is based on the habitability zone of a planet. So if an exoplanet is in habitable zone of its star, it implies that the probability of membership of that exoplanet is high in Earth-like. So because for a planet to be habitable, it should be within the habitable zone of the star. Okay, so certain distance it should cover. So that's why if we again check the catalog, and the planets who are within the habitable zone, those are actually considered, their probability value is set as high. And for others, we set their probability value as low. And then we fed the entire data to KNN algorithm, and we just achieve our output. So let me show you the output that we achieved here. So for the value of k equal to 1, the accuracy that we have got here is 92%. And for k equal to 7, we achieve 94 as a accuracy. This is the algorithm, okay, where we are just trying to satisfy both the probability Harding as well as this thresholding. And finally, we have applied the KNN on that updated data. Okay. This is what is the novel algorithm that we have developed here. And this is the output of this is the output of fmincon function. This is just a snapshot where, as I said, we have estimated the values of W dash and W double dash. And here the W dash is 0.99 and the W double dash is 0.01. And this is an example for CRS case. And we see here, this is the CDHS I, that is interior CDHS for some planet. This is surface CDHS, and this is the final CDHS for the exoplanet. So CDHS, the final one, this is actually fed to our KNN algorithm for further classification. And this is the classification result. So in the after classification, we saw that when we use DRS, 14 planets come under class 6, that is under Earth-like. Similarly, when we have used CRS, only 12 planets come under class 6. So actually, at this point of time, we have used only 664 exoplanets, confirmed exoplanet, and this is what the result we have achieved. Yeah, and this is the result of the proposed KNN algorithm. Okay, for 2 different cases. This is one graph. Okay, so I'll just quickly go to the next. Yeah. And also we have normalized the score, the CDHS score, and again we fed the data in the same way to attribute enhanced KNN, and we just we could achieve a good outcome or good result out of it. This is just a snapshot for normalization of CDHS score. Then we had proposed another metric that is called SESA, which is similar to CDHS, but the difference here is this model is it is an additive model. If we have seen already, this CDHS is a multiplicative model. So if we have certain parameter with value 0, we cannot use those parameter in CDHS. So that is why we just wanted to check with this model. And in this, we had actually worked. Okay, again, this model is applied on PHLEC data set, and we could achieve a good result out of it. Here again, if we see, this is what is how we can represent a CES production model. So I will directly go to our model, how we have manipulated this particular formula. I'll show you that. So here in this, we have introduced a 5th parameter that is called eccentricity, and we have already seen there are many planets whose eccentricity value were set as 0. So that is why we couldn't use this in a CDHS model. So first, in this, we have also included eccentricity, which is E here. So 5th parameter. And this is how we can write the CES production function. And here our main goal is to estimate rho. So rho is this the elasticity coefficient. So that needs to be estimated. And it is again an optimization problem where we want to optimize the value of rho so that we can maximize the y value. Again, we have considered these two cases, CRS and DRS case here, because IRS we cannot consider. These are the only two cases. We will always give a convex graph and where we can be able to find our maxima. And here our main goal is to minimize the cost and to maximize the profit. Okay, that is what is our main goal. So let us just directly go to the work. Yeah. So in this case, as I said, we have used a fifth parameter. So the eccentric, we had many eccentricity values which were marked as 0. So first we imputed the data, the eccentricity values using KNN imputation technique, and all this imputed data along with the other 4 parameters were fed to the CDHPF model. Because before we were not able to use eccentricity value to this, so we have used all those 5 parameters to CDHPF model, and then we saw the outcome. Also, the outcome of SESA, this model is also compared with CDHPF, because without imputing, we can use the eccentricity value in SESA, and we have seen almost similar outcome from both the model. Okay. So let us just see the output of it. So in this snapshot, if you see, we have this SESA score for CRS condition and SESA score for DRS. Similarly, CDHS score for CRS and DRS. So if you see here, this is a SESA score, and in all the cases, we have used, it says the SESA score and CDHS score for CRS and DRS without considering eccentricity values. Okay, this is the table without considering eccentricity. And here, if we see, this is the output of SESA score and CDHS score with imputed eccentricity. So here the CDHS uses imputed eccentricity value and SESA without imputing we have used. And if you see here, there SESA, both the scores under these cases are almost similar. SESA score for this particular planet is 2.4 and CDHS score with imputed eccentricity is 2.55. So we have achieved almost similar output from both the model. Okay. Fine. So now we will go to a new work that we have done here. So here we have actually proposed a new activation function which we named as SBUF. It is called Saha-Vora activation function, and this activation function can be applied in a neural network. Actually, we have tested this particular function in neural network, and we have achieved a good accuracy out of it. And as we all know, this ANN, it has it basically uses a different type of activation functions to activate the neurons so that we can get a better outcome out of it. So we have designed this new activation function, and this function is based on the formula that we have used in CDHF formula. So in this work, basically we are trying to compare this new activation function with sigmoid function. And we have seen that this new activation function has outperformed sigmoid. So we will compare that. And we know that the sigmoid function, sometimes it suffers from local oscillation, and it has this flat mean square error. It may see some plateau. That problem is there in sigmoid. So this we can overcome here in SBUF. So this is how we can write the activation function, the SBUF function. And we can see here, if you look at this particular point, this is actually, we have motivated to design this activation function from the CDHS. And here in this, the x is the linear combination of the input, okay, and 1 minus x is its complement. And we have certain weight. So this weight will be always vary between 0 to 1. And here the k, yeah, and then if we see the value of alpha, which is its value can vary between 0 to 1, and x can vary between 0 to 1, and its complement can vary between 0 to 1. So whenever we are going to use any planetary or any data value within it, so it should be normalized, should be between this 0 to 1, and we can apply SBUF on it. If when we look at this particular term, we can see this is basically we can actually approximate this to a first order polynomial. Yes. And as I said, it is equivalent to the CDHS formula, and we have already seen that we can achieve a global maxima from CDHS. So this function ensures that we can achieve the global optima by using this particular activation function. This is the first order derivative of SBUF. And we have plotted against some input variable, and we can see for different value of x, we can see this curve is very like smooth. We don't see any kind of oscillation or local oscillation in this particular diagram. So this simulation basically shows us there is no oscillation, or you can see because all of them, this is actually, there's less flattening of the function. If we look, this is for different value of x, it's for x equal to 0.1, then for 0.2, like that we have increased the value of x and we goes up to x equal to 0.9. So you can see at every point of time, we can see this curve is very smooth, and it can easily tackle the problem of local oscillation here. And we can see here, if we analyze this particular function, whenever the x is equal to y, alpha, it always, the first order derivative will be like it will disappear from here. And depending on the value of x, when we see the value of x and alpha, so based on their value, we can see whether this function is positive or negative. And accordingly, we can decide whether it is an increasing function or decreasing. Like in whichever way we want to use, we can make use of it by like tuning the values of alpha over here. Then this is the second order derivative of SBUF, and we have seen that from the second order derivative test, we can actually see, or we have seen here, that there is no saddle point in this particular diagram. Okay, so if I assume that if the value of x is say between 0 to 1, within that boundary between, if it is greater than 0 and less than 1, so if that is the assumption for x, here the condition of optimality can be achieved. And if you see here, for the value of alpha between 0 to 1, we can see the value of y. So whatever, the value of y, that when we are going to compute from the equation, we will see the y will be always between 0 to 1. And we can see from the diagram there is no saddle point in this particular equation. And also we have tested this SBUF function in a artificial neural network with backpropagation. So we have used as the PHLEC data, and we have applied artificial neural network with backpropagation by using SBFFN as an activation function. Here we have worked on 3,600 exoplanets with different class levels. So we have basically considered 3 class levels: non-habitable, mesoplanet, and psychroplanets. And here we have considered 45 important planetary parameters. And out of 68, 45 were considered, and all those 45 parameters were fed to an artificial to this ANN. And also, yeah, I'll come to this table later. So before that, let me just tell you, in this artificial neural, in this architecture in ANN, we have like 45 neurons in the input layer. Then we had 11 neurons in the hidden layer and 3 neurons in the output layer. And we have used like here the backpropagation method, and we ran this algorithm on this data set with learning, and we have seen that the best classification result that we have achieved with the learning rate of 0.1 and momentum of 0.001. And while classifying, we have divided the data set into 80% and 20% training test samples. And here we have used 3 classes, so class 1, class 2, and class 3. Class 1 is a non-habitable planet, class 2 represent mesoplanet, and class 3 represent psychroplanet. And as I said, the best classification results were obtained with different with 0.1 as learning rate, and alpha value was seen as 0.5, and k value is seen as 0.91. And we ran it for 100 epochs. And this is the confusion matrix that we have actually seen or we have achieved out of this classification result. But before that, again, let me go back and show you the accuracy of this algorithm. So we could actually properly, we could classify these various exoplanets, okay, and we could actually segregate them into their classes, whether it is a psychroplanet, meso, or non-habitable planet with high accuracy. And this is the final report of this ANN method that we have used here. Here we can see that all these classes are categorized in a proper way. So if we see the class 1 and class 3, the records are classified correctly. So, but there are some misclassification happen in class 2. So here we had total 9 planets from class 2, but 5 are correctly classified and 4 are misclassified. So we had analyzed and we just thought that the reason of this might be because we have a highly unbalanced data set. So because here we have not balanced the data set before using it in a neural network. So that might be one reason of this particular case. Yeah. And so next we will, so this is the main work that I have done in this entire 4 years of duration. So now I would like to just show you some properties of SBUF. So we can see here, like in this particular work, our main goal is to design a new activation function which can overcome the drawbacks of sigmoid function, because we have not compared it with any other activation functions right now. And we have used this function for classification of various exoplanets using artificial neural network. And we have seen that the local minima can be achieved when the value of x is equal to alpha. And it doesn't admit any flat MSE value, and it also does not admit any saddle point. So those things we have already seen, and it tackles the local oscillation problem in a better way than a sigmoid function. So next, I would like to conclude the whole work. So the main this dissertation basically handles few work related to various astrophysical objects. We have tried to work on different type of objects, and we try to classify them, specifically supernova, nova, and exoplanets. Also, we try to explore and understand the data that is present in various catalog, and also try to find out the various problems that is there, and we try to handle all those problems whichever way it's required. And we have used these 2 different methods like KNN and LSTM method to impute data in different catalogs depending on its requirement. And imbalanced data classes are also balanced using a sampling method. We have used k-fold cross validation so that we can get a proper outcome from these data sets. Also, we have used various machine learning algorithms to classify these objects. And we have classified type 1A supernova from other supernova data. We have also used random forest algorithm to classify S and P classes of nova data. Also, we have developed few new metrics which can compute the habitability score of various exoplanet. So we have discussed about the CDHS and SESA. And this 2 metric has given a very good outcome that we have seen from our various work. And various planetary properties are used to model this 2 metric. And we have also seen the SESA and CDHS. So both are trying to do the similar kind of work, but their nature is different. The SESA is an additive model, whereas CDHS is a multiplicative model, and both are scalable. So any number of parameters can be used in these 2 models. But right now here we have used maximum 5 parameters to compute this score. But these models are highly scalable. We have also proposed one novel activation function, and we have used this function in artificial neural network to classify the various exoplanets. So this is from my side. If you have any questions, you can ask.
Thank you, Kapuli. Questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
When you talk about artificially balanced data which you have derived,
yes,
you got a SVM at 36% and a KNN at 68%, and random forest gave a very good accuracy.
Yes, sir.
SVM accuracy is so low.
Yeah.
Whereas
I think, Kapuli, will you answer that?
Yeah, I think in
the initial stages.
Yes, I think in SVM the accuracy is low because we have not used any like proper kernel function in that. That is why probably.
One more observation is, like you have what is called attribute enhanced KNN.
Yes, sir.
If you try to utilize KNN in a better way, maybe some of those hidden attributes can come out. That actually will improve the accuracy. From 68, maybe I can go to 88 or 90, whatever it is.
No, Dr. Natarajan, the idea was not to improve the accuracy of KNN. The idea was to use, first of all, see the off-the-shelf machine learning algorithm so that we can sell our method. So the idea was to develop our own method, which Kapuli did, which is develop a new activation function, and that was the idea. Okay, so we did not really experiment a lot with the existing algorithms because that's not a new contribution as far as the dissertation.
That's fine.
So, and as far as SVM is concerned, I can answer your question. Was the data that Kapuli was talking about was not linearly separable at all. Yes. So if you don't really use a kernel, I mean SVM, and without any tuning of the hyperparameters, the SVM usually gives pretty result.
And also, if you see the accuracy of LDA, so LDA is not suitable for numeric data. It is suitable only for classification of documents. So that might be one reason why LDA did not perform well.
Okay. Number two is, you have that activation function.
Yes,
and then in your case, you had 68 and brought down to 45. It worked very well. What about the, case where the number of labels are very huge? How does it SBF will perform? SBF, when the labels are very huge. Okay. Now this is easily 68 to 45. That is a number is not very high.
Oh, number of features you mean?
Yeah.
Number of features. Yeah. No, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because the function is continuous in the multivariate domain as well. So I mean, instead of feeding it as like a 10-column feature vector or a 1,000-column feature vector, it don't matter because the function computation is really fast. You can also think of it. You can also think of it as an inner product computation. I mean, we can actually write it as an inner product computation as well, and so that's really fast. So that's not an issue at all. There are other issues. The SBAF has other issues. I mean, SBAF has other issues which probably, I mean, Kapuli did not get the time to discuss, but this is not an issue.
Okay. Number two is maybe the computation can be improved by hardwiring the whole, function. That will be better.
Meaning?
Maybe you can hardwire because this function, as the data sets increases or the number of labels increases.
Mm-hmm.
You mean number of features?
I have no doubt about function. I have absolutely no doubt of function. Only question is, if it can be hardwired, maybe you can speed up the whole operation.
As far as time is considered, I mean, the speeding up is actually on the other side of the neural network in the backpropagation, Professor Natarajan. I'm not sure if an activation function can really speed up your computation in the sense whether there is something else which can do a much better job, probably ReLU can, because I mean the derivative of ReLU is really, I mean it takes no time to compute the derivative of ReLU. But the speeding up of neural network, particularly if we want to stick to one hidden layer neural network, the speeding up of neural network is what we have done in separate work, where we have shown that if you use Lipschitz regularity with in the adaptive learning rate, you can speed it up at least 10 times. I mean, in some cases 50 times. So I'm not sure if activation functions can really help achieve that. But if you really want to speed up the operations, there are other ways of doing it, and which we have done also. Okay, but I mean, she did not have the time to discuss those.
Okay.
Because actually, when we designed this, we have concentrated only on sigmoid function at that point of time.
Yeah, that's fine. That's always starting point. No problem about that. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All right. If you don't have any other question, audience, may I request you to excuse us and leave us.
Yeah, I just want to say a few words. I would like to thank Sah sir, my guide, for his continuous effort. It is actually 24/7 effort he used to put in last 4 years. Not only in last 4 years, whenever we need his help and guidance, he always used to be there. And we always actually work as a team. It was not, it's not like I am a student who were working with him. It was a teamwork. Like whatever work we have presented today, it has been done in a team. So I would like to thank everyone who are there in my team, Surabhi ma'am, Suryodai, and all other like people, Jayan sir, Rita ma'am, because without your help and cooperation, I think this is not possible. Yeah, so thank you everyone for all of this. And also I would like to thank all my colleagues who helped me in every step, wherever I required their help, whether to engage my classes or whatever it is in college work. Yeah, so thank you everyone. Yes, thank you, sir.
Yeah, I wonder where Rita is. I think she's struggling.
It's okay.
That's the reason.
I can say thanks to her later.
I don't know. I mean, so okay. I mean, thank you for the nice presentation, Kakuli, and thanks friends and colleagues, former colleagues, for attending the talk. And if you please excuse us for the final round of interrogation by the soon-to-be doctoral. So thank you once again.
Thank you everybody.
And Sudipa, please send us a few screenshots of the meeting.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, who is this?
You need to.
Sir?
Is this Mr. Venu? You need to ask him to leave, or you can.
He's offline, sir.
Okay, he's offline. All right then.
Maybe you can kick him out.
Yeah, you can kick him out.
Okay, I have to. Okay, sir. It's done, I think. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah.
That's it.
Shall I stop recording, sir?
Yeah. You can stop recording. That's it. I mean, no, don't stop now, Kakuli. Wait.
Okay.
No, don't stop, because we have to send the recording to the university as well. No, so I mean, this is. So I have sent you an email, Jayant, just about an hour back.
I'll do that. No.
Okay. Yeah.
Probably after lunch. So an hour.
No rush, because once I receive it, then I'll upload the report.
Sure. I'll do it today itself.
Yeah.
I think I could have done little better, but I don't know. I just rushed. I missed few points.
No, I mean it's okay. It's all right. I mean it's okay. I mean it's
Good
always
Good
yeah.
talk.
It's always very difficult. I mean it's always like, you know, Kakoli. Whenever I give a talk, after the talk I think that I should have done better. So it's all right. I mean I don't know, but I mean probably Jayant also feels the same way. Yeah. So it's like, you know, it's very difficult to have it perfect.
Yeah, it's a good talk.
Yeah, yeah, it will come with experience. So Jayant, Kakoli is probably, you know, whatever we discussed, I think she's perhaps moving out. So, I mean, and in fact, she's thinking of going back to her native state.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Where is that? Assam, Kolkata?
You have a student at Tejpur, no, Jayant?
I've been to Tejpur.
Yeah.
No, you have a former student at Tejpur, no? Amit
No, he went to BHU.
Okay.
He went to BHU.
Amit.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tejpur, you know, the problem was that it's far out.
Yeah.
City.
It's remote.
So the youth faculty were complaining.
No, but once you are inside the campus, everything is available now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even schooling and.
Yeah, correct.
No, that's the same thing happens at Pilani also, right? I mean, everything is available inside the campus, but I mean, you just go out of campus and there is nothing, absolutely nothing. Yeah. So it's like it's very difficult and especially for, you know, these days everybody wants to solve the two-body problem. That's that's another problem with Tejpur.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the spousal
is better.
Yeah.
But there's still not much to see, much outside of. I mean, it's especially outside of Panaji.
No, there is not. I mean, it's like outside of, in fact, where our campus is, you have visited, right?
Yeah.
you just go out of the campus gate. There is not even an auto that you can get, actually.
Yeah, I know.
It's like you are terribly dependent on your own personal vehicle. Otherwise, most of our students, they walk to the nearest junction to get some food if they really want to go out.
Right.
Yeah, and surprisingly, a lot of students here don't have cars or bikes.
Sure.
I'm very surprised. They don't have. So, anyway, I mean.
But the whole time you've been there, it's been pandemic. So I
mean, I am indirectly accused of bringing the pandemic with me. So, you know, I mean, so I joined, and within 2 months, a lockdown. Fortunately, you know what? I was bringing my mom back from Calcutta, and we came back on March 18th, and March 19th is when the lockdown started.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, feather line gap. I mean, had I stayed back one more day, I would have been stuck in Calcutta.
I know. I was in Nainital. And we came back from Nainital on Wednesday night. We came back from Nainital on Wednesday night, and then the one-day lockdown on Thursday, and then the 60-day lockdown on Saturday.
Right.
So I would have been stuck in Nainital. I mean, worst places to be stuck, but still.
Yeah, it's a nice place. You have visiting Aris?
I'm on the governing council.
Governing council. Okay. So you have crossed over to the dark side, Jayant.
Only that. Only that. I doubt I'll be on much else.
Yeah.
Not the most popular person in DST, I think.
Whatever. So, okay, then I think we can conclude this. Thanks, Jayant, for sparing the time.
Just what are your plans for the future, Kakoli? You're going to Tejpur?
No, I need to see, sir. I should get some opportunity. Then only I can. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, I'll see that.
Because in Bangalore, Jayant, the opportunities are extremely limited because most of the engineering colleges in Bangalore are private. And there is no point in moving from one private engineering institution to another in Bangalore.
Right.
They are all the same.
Where are you now? You're at PES, is it?
Yes. I'm in PS right now.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there is this option of BITS as an off-campus thing in Bangalore, where they run their executive programs from. And salary and benefits wise is pretty similar, very similar to what we get on campus.
Is it?
So yeah. I mean, there isn't discrimination based on that, right? The only thing is the promotions are not, a regular structure of promotion is not followed off campus programs because they really do not require PhDs for their off campus programs.
Yeah.
But it's sort of a cool place. I mean, it's much better than, teaching in Dayanand Sagar or any other place, I mean,
but even in Tejpur, you won't be able to do much research, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think I may not be able to work in this area, but probably in machine learning and in this particular area, people are doing work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Now the only person I know there is Ghazi.
Okay. Bhattacharya is there. DK Bhattacharya.
No, but Jayant don't know DK Bhattacharya because.
Oh yeah, he's in computer science.
Yeah. Physics people.
Physics. Yes.
People, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So how is the general thing? Like they don't do much research, Jayant? In Tejpur, I don't know.
They have the problems, like all the places, they get caught up in syllabus. You have to make the syllabus and you have to teach and you have to do administration. And honestly, I mean, I'm never sure why people are not able to do research. But this is a practical, it's an observational fact, right? I mean, study of people and where people are and who does research.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know because I mean, frankly, if you are doing theoretical research and require minimum experimental backup, like the stuff we do, I mean, you really do not need much support, do you? I mean, except that you need some time for doing stuff, right? That people in Tejpur should be having. I mean, I don't think that's their problem.
I think people are not so interested.
Actually, motivation is also a problem, and also, even I see people here, Jayant, right? Okay. I mean, people who don't do research, they always come up with a bunch of excuses for not doing it.
Yeah.
So,
plus also the peer group. If you see everyone around you doing research, then it is easier.
Right.
I have to decide now what I can do.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So what should I do next, sir? Sahasar?
I would always encourage for a postdoc position, but then you have other problems. Like, I mean, I mean, that's an issue, right? I mean, going abroad for a postdoc, when you have a daughter, it's an issue. I mean, that would be my first encouragement. I always say that to my PhD students. I mean, if you can, just go.
Yes.
I mean, that's really valuable. I mean, but because doing a postdoc in India, I mean, I don't know. I mean, first of all, the pay is horrible. Second of all, I really don't know the value. I mean, Jayant would know better than I do.
It depends on who you work with.
Right. If you IISc, I don't know. IISc, I don't know who in IISc Jayant could be.
No.
I mean, I mean, at least in your peer group in IISc, I can't really think of anyone who, I mean, IIA also, I mean, you are retiring, otherwise would have.
Aren't there some positions in industry? Aren't there some of these academic industry positions?
There are. She has an interview lined up, actually. When is that, Kakule?
It's Monday.
Right?
This Monday.
Yeah. There is a position, an interview for a senior data scientist in an industry. That's lined up. And then she hasn't really started looking, actually, right? I mean, like, so this came along her way. So if this works out, I don't know. It's her decision.
See,
No, it's rewarding to work in private industry.
I think it's better to have a little bit of experience everywhere, and then I think can see what is better. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Well, there are some really good ones like Microsoft Research or IBM Research, but they don't take fresh PhDs.
Yeah,
they require postdocs as well.
Sure.
So other than that, most of the other IT sector guys who are doing machine learning, they are pretty much doing the regular stuff, Jet. I mean, they really don't care much, you know. So, well, at least things wound up in time. There is always this big problem with this particular university. They take so much time in the paperwork, in the processing after you submit your PhD. When did you submit, Kakuli, by the way?
August 2019.
You see? So, you know, and Survi submitted right after you, right?
No, before me, June 2019.
And hers got done only a month back.
Yeah.
A couple of others in the pipeline. They usually take pretty long time.
Yeah.
And given the fact that the referees were actually prompt in sending back their replies, you can't really blame it on the referees.
Yeah. That is.
I mean, they did respond within a month or 1.5 months. So, you know, anyway. So Kakuli, when I send everything, all the documents to the university, I'll have to send that final payment receipt to the university as well. So so you please send me that so that I can just consolidate everything. And
that is the defense Viva, whatever I paid, right?
That is some fee, right? I mean that.
Yeah, that was paid. Yes, correct.
So that
so
receipt.
The soft copy. Okay.
Right. The soft copy is good enough. I will first send them the soft copy, and then I will, whenever I can go out of the campus, if the director allows me, then I'll go out and courier it.
Okay. I'll talk to Surabhi, ma'am.
Yeah. There used to be a courier guy who used to come to the campus to pick up our mail, right? Even that guy is stopped from coming to campus.
Okay.
So,
So, they want soft copy also, right, sir?
Both. So I will upload the soft copy through that link, and then the same copy I'll print and then post.
All right.
Okay. Fine. So, or Jayant, whenever I come to Bangalore or you come to Goa, I don't know when that is going to happen. So, you know,
the second wave is scary stuff.
It is. I mean, and they are waiting for the election results. I mean, they are just waiting till the election. That is what I suspect. That once the elections are over, there is going to be another lockdown. That is what I'm suspect.
That'll be tough.
I know. I mean, lockdown in the sense, I don't know what kind of lockdown they are going to impose, because they can't really shut down everything.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So maybe night curfew or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then Anant Narayan will start writing long posts again.
He's getting tough. Tough to handle.
Yeah. So IISc open?
IISc is open, yes.
Okay. Yes. What about you guys?
I've had lunch with him a couple of times.
Okay. So what about you guys? Are you guys
We're completely open? We're open.
Okay.
Some sort of we do have some sort of restrictions on food and things like that.
I see. Okay.
So you can't eat too much at. I mean, you have to go at specific times. That's sort of.
I see it. Okay.
But other than that, nothing else.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. I think. Anything else? Kakuli, you want to ask us anything? Or Kakuli, there is this one thing I can tell you is that there is IIT Gandhinagar is paying very well for postdoctoral positions.
Okay.
I think they're paying 1.1, which is really good. I don't think anybody in India pays that much amount of money.
Okay.
So IIT Gandhinagar, there is this guy, no, Jayant, you also know him, right? This Bengali guy.
Sudipta Sarkar.
No, not the other guy. The other guy who does the computational high energy physics.
Computational? No, I don't know.
you and I mean, we met him during that last conference at PES, no? That fat mustache. I forgot his name.
Yeah.
I forgot his also. I mean, he is Pawan's friend. I think they did their PhD from Ayuka together. Anyway,
Okay.
I'll find out.
Yeah.
And if you are interested, let me know, Kakuli. Okay.
Okay.
So, but that also requires relocation to Gandhinagar, which is.
Yeah. Gujarat. That's okay. We didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Gujarat has other problems too. So what Yeah.
No, it's always difficult with family, and always difficult to know what to do.
Yeah. So, okay, then I will talk to you, Kakuli, later. I mean, I have to head out, right?
Yeah.
And I will finish the formalities today itself.
Okay. I'll find out all the snapshots and all from
just send me the snapshots and the fee receipt. That's it. Those are the two things that I need. Yes. And the this thing also. So what you can do is this meeting video, that recorded video, you upload to your Google Drive, right? Okay. And share that link with that video research email ID. I mean, there is no point in uploading, trying to attach such a large file. Okay.
Yes.
If they want, they can.
I think it should be done by me, or shall I share it with you?
Yeah, you share it with me, then I'll share it with the video
guy. Right? Yeah.
I don't think anybody bothers, but anyway, we'll do our.
Yeah, but they again say, no, it should go via proper channels. So.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see anything wrong in a PhD student uploading the video, but anyway, whatever. Okay then. Thanks again, Jayant. Hope
All right.
To meet you soon.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jayant, sir. Yeah.
Luck for the
Congratulations. Yeah. Congratulations, Dr. Kakuli Bora.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.